This is your home for St. Cloud State hockey, keeping you up to date on the NCHC.
One-timer coming, they score! Ripped in! A bomb from Pervix!
Women's WCHA.
So Dana Rasmussen fires and she scores! Dana Rasmussen for the Huskies alongside
The National Hockey League.
Dwayne Kaprizov in for a chance to win it! He scores! Kirill, the thrill is for real! Welcome to the NHL, a game winner!
And everything from the state of hockey.
St. Cloud Cathedral is now 42.6 seconds away from wrapping up the school's first ever title.
Welcome to the Huskies Warming House Podcast Den.
And welcome into episode number 142, the last episode of 2022, the calendar year here on the Huskies Warming House podcast. Excited to bring you this show as always. I'm Noah Grant, joined alongside by Nick Maxon here during this holiday season. And it is the middle of December here, and we've got a fair amount of things to talk about. Have a little bit of fun here as we kind of move into the end of Christmas, which, of course, I can't wait for the break. Obviously, for those who missed it, we're going to be off next Sunday. Come back January 1st of the new calendar year. So should be exciting. But what do we have on tap for you? Huskies Illustrated Weekly Roundup suddenly has a bunch of stuff, as no surprise, apparently. And then as far as NCAA hockey, we have 6 scores to recap. We'll get you kind of set up for what's going to be happening while we're gone before the end of the calendar year. We're going to have a little bit of fun talking just kind of in general about some Christmas stuff, college hockey as a whole. We're going to talk a little bit about the Minnesota Wild, probably a little bit more in depth now that we actually have a chance to maybe have some time to do that. A couple of fan questions that we had. We didn't have many, but we had enough to, at least jump into that. And then our extra ice session, the World Juniors are getting underway here. Teams are getting ready to get ramped up for that. So we're going to talk about what we expect out of that and who really has the edge for a World Junior championship that a lot of the rosters look largely the same, but a few surprises and a few changes that obviously have occurred for some of these teams as we move into probably one of the most coveted, I would say, tournaments, at least in Canada, that, people kind of look forward to every Christmas time and the like. So with that being said, we hope you are having a happy and wonderful holiday, and we will get started with Center Ice View News and Notes and the Huskies Illustrated Weekly Roundup.
Center Ice View News and Notes. Center Ice View provides you with the best coverage of St. Cloud State Huskies hockey, from game notes, recaps, photos, and more. Go to centericeview.com.
Huskies Illustrated Weekly Roundup, the Center Ice View News and Notes, Noah, and shall we say a story we've been following for some time. Looks to be finally getting some positive news, if you want to call it that. Yeah. We're talking about Hockey Canada, right? They've elected some new board members. So effectively, they elected a slate of candidates to fill 9 vacant board seats just yesterday. Retired Judge Hugh L. Fraser is Hockey Canada's new chair. Former women's national team Cassie Campbell-Pascal is one of new 8 directors, I should say. The Federation's 13 provincial and territorial bodies had the choice to accept or reject the 9 names, which included 5 women and 4 men, put forward by independent nominating committee. So this is step 1, right, Noah? Because as we followed this story, it's not just been about who, but it's been about what they're doing, right? So the real measuring stick for me is, so what happens with these new members, right? It's one thing to put new names in there, but if they follow the same procedures, it means nothing. So still a story to watch, but effectively some new leadership. You hopefully that also some new policies, some new directions for Hockey Canada, especially in the wake of multiple allegations of misconduct in many different facets that stemmed from the organization for the better part of, quite a few years.
Yeah, well, that's one of the things that we've kind of noticed too, though, is that it seems like this board is very diverse, and it seems like obviously they cleared the board, the 13 provincial and territorial bodies, and it seems like this board has a good representation of what people are looking for. It wasn't something that was hastily thrown together. One of the things that's interesting, and I'd be curious to know this, because obviously Hockey Canada represents everybody, but predominantly at its base was probably more catered to men, as hockey evolved before women's hockey really gained a lot of traction. How many boards do you see in a big sporting event or corporation like that where there's more women than men on that board? That's an exciting thing, I think. So of course, having a couple of former Hockey Canada players, both men and women, on that board, that's a big deal, I think, for that representation as well, too, to kind of know where to advocate from a player side of things, too. So these are steps in the right direction. Leave it to Hockey Canada to give us a little bit of happy Christmas news before maybe a potential more torrential rain as we move into
storm clouds that they have to go through.
You know what's interesting? I don't know if anybody else. Ian Kennedy had tweeted this too. Dominic Ducharme. Have you seen the tweets on that? By the way, not to be a Debbie Downer, but it's been it's been now 3 separate teams. I believe he was part of the 2018 team, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong. But it was that team, a QMJHL team that he was coaching, and then a youth team. And they've all had sexual misconduct or assault allegations, and they're all kind of similar. And it's been 3 separate teams that he's coached. Of course, Dominic Ducharme, of course, former coach of the Montreal Canadiens, and then has had some World Junior, obviously, experience too, and has been a very successful coach at a lot of levels. So I'm not sure what kind of rainstorm we're going to get moving into January and February, but there's some things that are really opening up here,
Well, and at the end of the day, there's still storms that haven't passed yet, right? No, there's still things that are still being worked through, and this new group of leadership is going to have to deal essentially with the consequences that stems from those investigations and those allegations. So it's something to keep an eye on. Here's some interesting news, Noah. We've talked on this issue before, and what I mean by that is there's a group out there that says the NHL season's too long, right? That it's 82 games. It's a lot of hockey, and especially in an Olympic year where you have to take time out and then you have to scrunch essentially 3, sometimes 4 games in a week, if not 6 days.
Right.
Supposedly some sources with ESPN, who I should say told ESPN, said that the NHL is actually looking to add 2 games to the schedule from 82 to 84. The idea of this is there seems to be a schedule reconfiguration. Now, we've seen a schedule reconfiguration not that long ago where, remember when the Minnesota Wild as a Western Conference team would not see essentially the Eastern Conference at all? They would a couple of pockets. They reconfigured that where you're playing the East teams at least once at home and once away. So you're seeing Sidney Crosby, you're seeing Alex Ovechkin, name your player of choice, right? Just to try to, so the fans can see everybody, which I think was a good move.
Right. Now
it seems like there seems to be a renewed focus on rivalries. Gee, who would have thought rivalry sells, right? Supposedly, the big thing is, well, let's say it this way. Under the current format, some teams play only 3 games against a division rival, just again, based on the schedule of 82 games, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's 4, depending on the year. And then we talked about how the rest of the schedule kind of rounds out, right? At the end of it, what they want to do is add those 2 games to a division rival. Here's my question, though. If you do that, rivalries change, Noah. That's the thing. So it's like I get the idea, but how do you schedule this? This, because let's talk about the NCHC. Right?
They're divisional games.
I get that.
Yeah.
But
so calling it a rivalry is like, for example, it'd be like another game during the season against Arizona,
right? But
which is
here's my question though. So say that we go back 3-4 years, it's Minnesota, Chicago, right? The NCHC approves their 2023-24 schedule this week, essentially. They do it during the holiday break.
Yeah.
The NHL, with the TV schedule and everything, they're pretty much doing that already, if not. So my question is, say you approve the 2 extra games and you're picking that team, right? How do we know that's going to be a rivalry game this early on? That's what I mean. Like, I get what they're selling.
No, I think what's happening is if you have a division of 8 teams, 6 of them you end up playing 4 times, but 2 of them you only end up playing 3. So they're just adding an extra game for the other 2 teams in your division.
So it's not a rivalry.
No, I mean, you call it a rivalry, but divisional rival.
That's essentially what I'm putting on the plate for the NHL is they're
Yeah.
claiming it as rivalry, but the real answer is no. That's really
Well,
not.
it just says a divisional rival. I mean, it's not a rivalry; it's a divisional rival, meaning a
Selling
team in
point
your
for me.
division. That's all it
Selling
means.
point for me. Anyway,
This is not the first time the NHL has had an 84 game season, though. It used to actually be that way. I don't know if it was for 2 seasons or 3 right before the current flip to the format. So it hasn't been formally broached at the Board of Governors meeting, but it's expected to be discussed at the general manager meeting in March.
yeah.
We might be a year or 2 away from this if it does happen. I've always been in the camp where I think there should be less games. In fact, if it was me, I would drop 6 games off of the schedule and I would play each divisional team maybe only 3 times or that sort of thing. And I get the divisional games obviously sell. It's different when, Minnesota's playing Colorado versus, another team like Vancouver, I guess,
Right.
although the Vancouver games probably do still pretty well, I'm sure, with the old Northwest division that we had. But yeah, I don't know.
I have an idea. I'll put it this way, and this flows actually into our next topic really well. Is do you think we're having this discussion if the league was still not recovering financially from the pandemic? I see this. Yeah. I see this more as driving more revenue. That's how I see this, and it's a marketing tool for the rivalry. That's how I see it anyway.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, Noah, just to keep moving things forward, right? That $4 million salary cap rise. They've really, really regressed that number. Supposedly now the new projection, $1 million.
Yeah.
Not surprising. I hate to say this, but the NHL likes to put out the feelers. This happens quite a bit, right? Where, we see revenues 3 and 4, but then the numbers start coming in. They're like, wait, this isn't going as well. So this is coming now from Gary Bettman, right? So they're projecting a $70 million escrow balance at the end of this season, which would result in the cap rising only $1 million to 83.5 for next season. So what that means is, now mind you, escrow, we've talked about this before. It's money owed by the players to the organizations. Had that been paid off, it would have actually increased to $4 million. So here's the good news there, Noah, and we'll be quick on this, and that is we're still only halfway point of the season. These are projected numbers. So if the league starts doing better as far as revenues are concerned, reverse retros, anything they can do to generate money, there's still time for those numbers to get better. But interesting that they start at 4, regress down to 1. And for a lot of teams out there, that $3 million, I mean, let's just take a 1. Let's say it goes to 2. That's a lot of money for teams. I think half the league is under $2 million in cap space.
Yeah. Hashtag Minnesota Wild a little bit there. You could use any space that they can get. That's the thing, though, is, I mean, that's a lot of money, $70 million that is owed. Yeah. And for a big corporation, a big business like the NHL, it might not feel like that. But the problem is, I think maybe the NHL was hoping that the players would get to that point where they would, bump that number up and pay off a lot more of that and get closer to 0 for that. It's just not looking all that great right now. Mm-hmm. And there's no real surprise by that. I think until we get through the current CBA or close to the end of the current CBA and kind of give a couple years to get us to that point, I think it's just going to kind of be a slow uphill battle for the NHL until something kind of finally pushes them over
2025, right? When the Wild get off their salary cap, which how like storybook timing would that be, right?
Yeah.
Speaking of storybook timing, this is kind of speaking of surprising news. Eeli Tolvanen from the Predators put on waivers. That part's surprising. What's not surprising, he was claimed. Seattle Kraken claim him off. He's a young player. He's 23 years old. He's a former 30th overall pick in 2017. He's got 51 points in 135 NHL games. Really good defensive metrics. In fact, a 71% WAR. So wins above replacement for those who don't know. So that's kind of curious.
Yeah.
And sometimes, Noah, again, this is sports, right? Sometimes the player is really good, maybe just wasn't a fit with what they had and what they had constructed, and maybe just didn't fit with the system. And
smart move by Seattle, though. I mean, no surprise. I mean, add to an already great roster and add, if there's one thing that Seattle struggles with at times. It's not scoring goals, it's keeping them out of their own net. So having a good defensive forward certainly won't hurt you. And I always thought it was funny because, I mean, not that it's amazing, but I love how they're like, yeah, he only has 51 points in 135 NHL games. Like, that's not bad.
No.
Like that's productive,
And at the end of it, it's your bottom six right now. We talk about this in hockey lingo, right? In the casual fan says all 12 players out there have to have scoring ability. Well, sure, you got to have some of it, but the reality is your bottom six are supposed to match up against the other opponent's top six, and they're supposed to shut them down effectively. Now that's, kind of old school, but simplification for just the sake of the argument. Speaking of case for the argument, Trevor Moore made himself quite the argument to ink a pretty nice 5-year extension with the LA Kings, $4.2 million average annual value in that contract. This is a nice deal, 27 years of age, 18 points in 32 games. So it's a nice price point for the production. And the length is okay, 32, 33, so it's not going too far. I think a good extension for both sides. I think it's a really good contract.
Yeah, Los Angeles Kings making that move. Trevor Moore, kind of interesting to see his career progression. We kind of thought that he was maybe going to be a, $1.52 million player, kind of thing. And he's really carved out a really nice career for himself. I would certainly agree. Other aforementioned players, by the way, from last week or the week before, Alex Fermenton, he's going to play in Switzerland for the rest of the season. Of course, his contract was not renewed or re-upped essentially by the Senators before the deadline of December.
Right? Yeah, he was
before December 1st. So he is going to be playing in Switzerland for the rest of the year. Of course, he was on that 2018 World Junior team. We kind of touched on that. They're probably waiting and seeing on that one. As far as closer to home, by the way, Matt Cullen's jersey retirement, January 14th at the Herb Brooks National Hockey Center. His number 9 is going to be retired into St. Cloud hockey history there in that building. So hopefully everybody can get out and check out that retirement. So it would only be the second jersey number in program history to be retired, I believe. So
the other,
which is interesting. Obviously a very storied NHL career, no doubt. 3 Stanley Cups, I believe.
3 Carolina, and then 2 with Pittsburgh.
2 in Pittsburgh. So, which it's interesting because Matt Cullen, obviously a very good hockey player throughout his career, but he didn't post like eye-popping numbers even in the mid-90s when he was here, the 2 years that he was here. So you kind of wonder if his body of work in the NHL has, obviously alluded
a lot to do with it.
Yeah. So, but yeah, nonetheless, January 14th, Herb Brooks National Hockey Center, that will be happening. Vegas Golden Knights defenseman Alex Pietrangelo returned to practice yesterday after a 9-game absence. His 4-year-old daughter became seriously ill. Daughter Evelyn came down with the flu, influenza, over Thanksgiving, and then had encephalitis, which is basically a lesion on her brain, and swelling that causes in there. She essentially lost motor skills, not being able to open her eyes for the first 5 days. Of course, when you put all that pressure and compression on the brain, things get pretty scary. So it sounds like the treatment worked a little bit quicker than they had anticipated, and the recovery road has been swift and positive. So wishing them the best luck. That's always a scary thing to see players go through. Red Wings, Jakub Vrana reinstated from the player assistance program. There's no timetable for him in his return, but the Wings can certainly use him back. Lucas Sedlak leaving Philadelphia. He's returning home to Czechia, which this was interesting. I didn't look at his point total. I'm sure it's in this article here. He had 18 goals, 17 assists in just under 200 NHL games. 3 goals and 5 assists in 27 games this season. He's headed back home. I mean, he's basically just homesick, which is kind of interesting. His comments, his quote was, "I just felt overall me playing in the NHL, it didn't bring me what I expected it to bring me. I would rather be home with my family. It's more than one reason. They all kind of combined together. That's why I made a decision. It's nothing with the organization, team, or anything like that." He thinks he'll probably end up playing in the Czech league over there. 1 year, $800,000 contract. He was claimed on October 19th by the Flyers, and head coach John Tortorella said, hey, he's just decided to go home. He's done. He wants to go back home. He's a good man. We're going to miss him. So, of course, he played under Tortorella when he was back in Columbus. He's originally a Blue Jacket draft pick back in 2011. So kind of an interesting story, I thought. Played in the KHL for a little bit too, but it's interesting. We think of the NHL as this, obviously great league and that sort of thing. But there's some players that they don't find what they're looking for, which is an interesting thing to hear about a league. But, if it's not a right fit and you feel like it's a lot of work for a whole lot of nothing for you,
and that's the thing, right, Noah? And, does that mean he was looking for more success personally on the ice? Was it the off ice stuff? I mean, we'll never know. And at the end of the day, it's none of our business, right? I think the one thing that's positive here is, he wasn't happy with where he was at. And it's interesting to think, oh my gosh, a player not happy to be a National Hockey League player, right? Well, as you mentioned, the numbers weren't fantastic. And there are some people that are out there, and I'm not saying this is, him specifically, but you kind of wonder if they just maybe expected more from themselves, right? They wasn't giving them the joy just being in the lineup. They want to be more of a bigger contributor. And over time, I mean, it kind of wears on you. Now, again, we don't know if that's the case, but again, good on him for recognizing that this was a situation that wasn't healthy for him and what he needed to do to be more happy. Now, it's possible, right? We've seen this before, Noah, where you go back home and then the itch is still there, right? So maybe he still plays in Czechoslovakia or the Czech Republic, I should say, and then maybe says, maybe I want to go back. We'll see. Time will tell, but good on him for, getting himself into the right situation for him.
Well, the other thing people have to realize, too, is that, I mean, it's still a job for people. It's still going to work. And the other thing that is different from most jobs is, the fact that, one, there's an insane amount of pressure on these players, which, you say, oh, there's pressure at my job. There certainly is, but it's kind of a unique pressure where, the mistakes have to be really limited. And it's hard work. Your body is your biggest tool, and you have to go through this physical and mental grind that it's kind of hard to explain to people. I mean, they get it, but, going in and day out, sometimes that just takes a toll on you. And if you're playing fourth line minutes for all of that hard work and, making a contract that is close to league minimum, sometimes it can be, not exactly the most exciting thing for people as they enter into.
Right. It looks good from the outside, but if you're that player in that position, it's not as glamorous.
The other thing to remember is, depending on taxes, some players, like his contract, $800,000, he might only take home about $200,000. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, like
3 to 4. And if you're in Canada, probably even less, depending on those taxes, they're ridiculous.
Yeah, so people see, $1 million contract, you're only taking maybe a fourth of that home or a third of that home if you're lucky.
So the escrow too, right? So
So last topic here, injuries. Golden Knights, Jack Eichel is on injured reserve right now. He was retroactive 7 days prior. He's missed 4 games already. He's day-to-day currently, so they're kind of hoping that he's going to return back sometime around the holiday break, I'm sure. Winnipeg, Blake Wheeler and Nate Schmidt out at least 4 weeks. Couple of former Golden Gophers in that group. Groin surgery for Blake Wheeler and an upper body injury for Nate Schmidt. So
he took a nasty hit the other night.
Yeah.
Yes,
so, and then 2 others here, Ottawa Senators, Tim Stützle out at least a week with a shoulder contusion. And then in Nashville, Predators forward Michael McCarron enters the NHLPA Player Assistance Program, and it will be unavailable indefinitely. And welcome in to the main portion of the show, episode 142 here. Nick Maxon joining myself, Noah Grant. Nick, happy holidays. It's a week from Christmas here. We are pushing into the last couple of weeks of 2022 for those who missed it in the other portion of the show. We are going to be off next week. Next Sunday, of course, is Christmas. We'll be back the week after that. So hopefully you enjoy the rest of your holiday season before we flip over the calendar year. Any big plans for Christmas, Nick?
No, not really. Just hang out with family. If it's Christmas Eve, I know there's some football games. Hopefully the purple and gold don't have to come back from a 33-point deficit to a 4-8-1 team. So that would be nice.
Yeah, that was crazy.
But not really. It's supposed to be really freaking cold. It's supposed to be really cold.
It's cold here already. Yesterday we were down in Bismarck for the Toro game, obviously, and I was telling Nick before the show, we had a coach get hit in the head, 2 fans get hit in the head with a puck. It's been a wild ride. Weather related things. We have a player with an injury who's ended up in the hospital. Like, things are
they're nuts. And for those who are listening to maybe outside the Midwest, it's been relatively mild up until this week for December. It's been in the 20s/lower 30s. This is unseasonably warm. let's just say that we got pushed over the cliff. It's now in the single digits. The cold has set in. It looks like it's going to be here for a little bit with possible more winter weather on the way next week, which could hamper some travel plans.
Yeah, deep freeze is definitely in effect here. And it's kind of misleading too, because even if you look at the temperature, it'll say 1 degree, 0 degrees, -2 degrees, whatever. But with wind chill and the feels like temperature, we're hitting like -30s. So it's just, it hasn't been all that great. And I kind of think it's funny because I remember, when I was still playing, some of those road trips where you would get off the bus 2-3 o'clock in the morning and it's 20-30 mile an hour wind outside and you're carrying your bag across a parking lot or back into the rink or across campuses. It's terrible. So hopefully stay warm and cozy this holiday season, because it certainly becomes difficult. Got some men's league hockey going on, and then I'm headed home at least for a week, and then we'll be back, of course, for Minotauro hockey. They've got 3 games before the end of the calendar year. They had 1 rescheduled because of the blizzard that ended up this week. So 6 games in 10 days, I believe, 3 of them against St. Cloud, 3 against Bismarck. So I have to see how that is going to rock and roll as always. We'll get into more Christmas stuff, I think, as we go through the show here. We're just going to recap very quickly what happened. Only 6 scores around the NCAA that we're going to touch on. We'll give you a brief overview of what's going to be going on in men's hockey upcoming through January 1st, essentially. And then obviously we'll recap everything when we get back and visit our great listeners and viewers as always. Starting in the Big Ten non-conference action, Ohio State traveled to Bowling Green and kicked the snot out of Bowling Green, basically.
Yeah, wasn't even close.
5-2 and 9-4. So was curious to see if that was going to be a lot tighter matchup than it was. It's Mankato team, Nick.
Oh, boy. Well, it's sort of good news for Huskies fans in a way.
Yeah.
Sort of. Yeah.
Yeah, this Bemidji State team is climbing, and I know that a lot of people want Bemidji to climb, obviously Huskies fans, but other teams included, certainly because of the loss to them. 4-3 overtime victory and 4-1 sweep. The Beavers over Mankato. This Mankato team, they're not giving their goaltenders goal support. They're not, nothing. You know what's interesting, Nick? I actually had a kind of an interesting conversation with Marissa Voss, who of course is with us at MNCAA, and we talked about it. I if I don't remember the specifics, I apologize, but it was something like where Keenan Rancier has like his record is like 6-8 or 6-9 or something like that this season, entering last weekend, and he had played. He had given up only 2 more goals in 2 more games and seen like 120 shots more than Alex Tracy and let in, only 2 more goals and that sort of thing. So everyone wants to pin all this on Keenan Rancier, which is not to say that every goal he's let in has been, not his fault, because certainly there's something he should have had, but there has been no goal support for this team. They've only given up, each goaltender, Alex Tracy's given up 4 goals 1 time. Other than that, each of these goaltenders has not given up more than 3 goals in a game until this upcoming weekend against Bemidji, that 4-3 OT loss. Like, their goaltenders are doing what they're supposed to do, and this Mavs team, like, they might not make the tournament, Nick.
No, and the biggest thing with Minnesota State too, they're kind of like Bemidji when you talk about what makes them successful is they usually have to play with the lead, right? They have not been getting out to that lead because of the scoring droughts, and then instead of being that defensively tight neutral zone team, they're having to chase. So their game plan has been flipped on its head, for lack of a better phrase. And unfortunately, because of guys they lost like Nathan Smith, Julian Napravnik, just to name a couple, right? They just haven't been able to overcome it. Now, we've also mentioned on that same podcast, there's some players that have been returned and just have not produced, right? So it's been sort of, shall we say, a perfect storm for him a little bit.
Right.
And goaltending is easiest because it's the lazy argument. But if you actually dive into watching them play, if you actually dive into the numbers and look at what actually is happening, like you mentioned, goaltenders will always want to stop every puck. Some of it they'll want back. Some of it's like it's through a screen, it's a tip. There's nothing they can do, right? So either way, it just seems like the The hill is much bigger this year for Minnesota State than it was certainly in years past.
Yeah, certainly would agree. Other scores to recap here. Lake Superior State, another victory for them, 3-0 over Michigan Tech, and then Tech came back Storming through with a 5-1 victory last night, which is no surprise, but that loss might hurt Tech. I think people have this idea that it's going to just bury them in the pairwise of the polling. I don't think that's the case. Obviously, Lake Superior is not a good hockey team, and it will certainly pull them down a couple of spots. But, I mean, some people were talking about that they were going to drop 10, 11 spots. I don't see that. It's not that detrimental.
If anything, it's if you're a bubble team, if you're in that bubble area come pairwise selection, that's where it hurts you, right? It's when you're making the humans decide, which team has performed better. That's where it can be the lead anchor, right? It's not necessarily the placing, the immediate aftershock.
Is that a Lakers joke? Because they have an anchor.
The lead anchor. Yeah. Got it. But yeah, that's really what it comes down to is if you're sort of in that, that 16, 17, 15 spot and it's really super close and the committee's trying to pick which team deserves to be there, that's where a loss like that can sway against you, not necessarily immediate, like we said, you're not going to drop 10 spots, but definitely doesn't help the argument. We'll say it that much.
Yeah. Other conference games going on this week. Ferris State, St. Thomas. It was a split. St. Thomas 7-4 night number one. Ferris State 4-2 with an empty netter last night to earn the split on that one. This Tommy's team is gaining a little bit of traction here. Ferris State has kind of disrupted some people's holiday season, so to speak, in the past couple of weeks. So keep an eye on that one. Good to see the Tommies be successful, obviously, making that conference ever more competitive. The CCHA, is not the same powerhouse as the Big Ten or the NCHC, but it certainly has, I would say in some senses,
more interesting.
Yeah, maybe carried the most intrigue out of any conference this season. Maybe I'd say NCHC second, Big Ten third, just because the NCHC has had some interesting players that have not been in spots that we anticipated, like even close.
No, and for the Big Ten, I think even going into the season, I think there was a known. There's been some surprises. Shall we say Michigan and shall we say Penn State, maybe in opposite ends of the spectrum. But I think there was less intrigue, like I said, with the Big Ten, because I think coming into the season, I think there was a good idea where that would shake out.
Yeah, certainly would agree. Alaska Fairbanks traveling to Anchorage, 4-0 victory on the first night, and then last night, I believe this score held. Yes, it did, a 1-0 victory for Fairbanks in night number two. So the Seawolves shut out in back-to-back nights on home ice in front of a sellout crowd both nights. So that's tough. And then Northeastern will travel to Long Island today on Sunday, so we'll keep an eye on that one. What's on tap here? So I tried to break this down in a way that it was palatable as much as I could. Obviously, we've got games from December 27th, which is a Tuesday right after Christmas, which kind of stinks for some teams, and then all the way through into essentially January 1st or 2nd, even Monday into Tuesday. And then I kind of went basically to that, I believe, Wednesday after, so it might be January 3rd is the farthest we went, and then that Thursday, whatever it is, maybe it's the 5th is that Thursday. So
right, yeah.
That Thursday onward will be the next week, is the start of the new week. I always start every Thursday unless there's just a couple scores that kind of we can meander in there. So we'll try to make as much sense as we can. What I can tell you is there are 3 tournaments going on that were easy to track here. Great Lakes Invitational, Tuesday, December 27th. Of course, this is the Invitational last year in which Michigan did not end up playing Western Michigan, for those who are curious what that matchup is. The Wolverines are not in this one this year, which is...
you got to show up first. So that helps.
You know what's interesting? As far as I can see in the schedule, these teams only play, there's only 2 games, and that's it. They don't play each other again. So it's kind of it's a weird little invitational to come back from Christmas that early, but nonetheless, Michigan Tech has Western Michigan. That should be a good matchup. I'm excited to see how that ends up. And Ferris State gets Michigan State. So those two games happen, and then that's it, apparently.
Kind of just like free hockey for a fan, right? Just kind of
I suppose if you put it all on the same day, people can't leave after, right? Holiday face-off Wednesday, December 28th. This is, I believe, in Wisconsin. Lake Superior State travels to Wisconsin, and Clarkson has UMass. Very weird mix of hockey teams in this one. And then Lake Superior State and Wisconsin will get Clarkson or UMass on the other side of that the next night. So we won't know until they play each other, and who wins, who loses. Same with the Ledyard Bank Classic, which is closer to the actual weekend of the 29th through the 31st. Providence has Yale, Merrimack has Dartmouth, and then Providence and Merrimack get either Yale or Dartmouth. Providence and Yale get either Merrimack or Dartmouth, respectively. So we'll keep an eye on that. So those are your tournaments. As far as actual conference play, we do have 2 matchups. They both come from Atlantic Hockey. Mercyhurst travels to Sacred Heart Thursday, Friday, and Canisius is at Air Force. As far as the non-conference schedule, Nick,
Quite a bit.
This is going to be kind of annoying to cover here, but just to run you through the gamut here, the under-18 team has Minnesota. RPI travels to Bowling Green, and AIC travels to Cornell. Those are both Thursday, Friday matchups. UConn, home and home against Long Island. So independent team matching up against a Hockey East team there. New Hampshire travels to Union. Penn State, Big Ten team, has a home and home with RIT because they're pretty close proximity.
Yep.
Alaska Anchorage is headed to UMass Lowell. That is a huge travel.
Wow.
Holy
that's
smokes.
like a 7-hour flight.
Yeah, that's got to be at least 2,000 miles, if not more, right? Like
That'd be closer too, because it's 1,100 from Minneapolis to Las Vegas.
Yeah, that's
I know that.
Maybe even 3. I would love to actually.
3. It's probably closer to, maybe 2,500.
I got curious. You made me curious. Alaska Anchorage. Should we book a flight? What do you think?
I'm gonna guess 2,500.
Alaska Anchorage. So 2,500 over or under here. That's the real question. 2, UMass Lowell. Are they in Massachusetts? Where would they be? Where is the UMass Lowell?
That'd be Boston. That's where you're flying into.
Let's go with Boston. Alaska Anchorage to Boston, Massachusetts.
You can fly from Anchorage? Oh, you can. Okay, so Anchorage.
Oh my gosh, that's like a 10-hour flight. I think.
Let's see.
In miles. Yeah, like a 10-hour flight in miles. I want miles. That's what I'm looking for.
I'm on a, shall we say,
oh my gosh, holy smokes, Nick! It is 4,555 miles. If you're driving.
Oh, we were. At least I was the under. I didn't lose the showcase by default, so that's good.
Oh my goodness.
I'm pulling up a
I suppose there's
airlines.
I suppose there's this country called Canada in between that probably adds a little bit of mileage. Yeah, what I'm seeing for the flights, Alaska Airlines 15 hours with a connecting flight, Delta 11 hours with a connecting flight, United 10 hours, American 10 hours.
Yeah.
Oof.
Jesus Lord.
Well, I hope that they plan to stay for a couple of days.
That's yikes. That's
gross. That's a brutal road trip.
I
mean, it's cool they get to go to the East Coast and that sort of thing, but you guys, wondering why the Seawolves in programs like this struggle sometimes. You know what's interesting? So, for example, like the Kenai River Brown Bears in the Null, right? They were almost at a point where they were going to fold, and Alaska Fairbanks actually subsidized them. Alaska Fairbanks is kind of the program up there right now, and they've even helped. I believe they've helped the Seawolves out a little bit too. So, I mean, they're a group that is doing decently financially, and they've kind of helped hockey stay in Alaska a little bit. It's been kind of an interesting story. But anything else you want to add about our flight from east to west and then some?
Yeah, if we were taking this flight up in first class just so I can be by my freaking self,
yeah,
it'd be terrible spending that much time with you next. No, thank you. That's nice. Thankfully, there's plenty of in-flight entertainment options and like Angry Birds.
Happy holidays from Nick Maxon.
Exactly. The Grinch on the airplane. Anyway,
romance. I would love to see you in a Grinch costume. I think it would be good. Boston.
Could you imagine like the Grinch and like it with essentially a crossroad with like snakes on a plane? You see how horrible that movie would be.
You know what's funny? Speaking of travel, by the way, Boston College is headed to. Sorry, I'm looking at Safari because I wanted to see how far this was. Boston College is headed to Tempe to take on Arizona State in the Sun Devils.
That'd be like 3,000 miles.
This is 2,650 miles by drive. So I'm going to assume they're going to be flying.
Well, you don't say.
What? You never know. Boston University, they're playing Harvard at home, so they limited the travel a little bit better. That one is a Friday only matchup as far as I can tell. Maine travels to Colgate, Quinnipiac to Holy Cross, Northeastern Bentley, Lindenwood, independent team, is headed to Vermont. They give Denver quite a scare this past weekend. That's the other
did.
score that we'll talk about, obviously. U.S. under-19 team, after having Minnesota, will have North Dakota on Saturday. Minnesota will then flip over and have a single-game matchup against Bemidji State. So if the Beavers could pull out a victory there, that would be huge for Huskies fans.
Yeah.
And then Alaska, Fairbanks is headed Saturday, Sunday to Notre Dame, as is Northeastern and Harvard on Sunday only. Then we only got two more. Army travels to Yale on Monday and Brown at UMass on Tuesday before we flip over. NCHC, of course, every team except for Denver was off this past weekend. Lindenwood traveled for some non-conference action at Magnus Arena. 5-0 victory in night number 1, but it was a 5-4 finish in night number 2. Denver almost getting a scare from Lindenwood there. This Lindenwood team, I mean, they've given some of these teams fits. Yeah. Minnesota, obviously, early on in the season. Of course, non-conference wise, nothing has changed in the NCHC standings. Denver, St. Cloud, CC, Omaha, Western, Duluth, North Dakota, Miami, in that order.
Just how we predicted it.
Yeah, right. I think it's crazy. I mean, obviously, Denver 3 points ahead of St. Cloud, and then CC 3 points behind them. And then you have a smorgasbord of teams between 17 points and 12 points between 3 and 7. So
3 and 7 is there could be a lot of shuffling there, depending on how the rest of the schedule works itself out. And dare we say even 2 to 7, depending on how well that team continues to play.
Yeah. Certainly. What's on tap for the NCHC? Of course, like we mentioned, Western Michigan is playing Michigan Tech, so we'll kind of keep an eye on that. I left that in the tournament that it's in, so that's one NCHC team you're going to be missing. Princeton travels to Colorado College, and as Huskies fans know from a couple of years ago, we don't want to sleep on this Princeton team because they could give you a scare. St. Lawrence travels to Omaha to face the Mavs. Niagara is traveling to Miami. I'm curious about that Niagara matchup to see who comes out on that one. And then St. Thomas travels to Duluth on Saturday only. And then, of course, Manitoba, an exhibition game against St. Cloud State on December 30th. So obviously we talked about the Huskies, they have to have it. They have to get it done.
Just really confidence wise.
Yeah. It's kind of a weird little schedule that, you hope nobody gets hurt. That sort of thing as well too. So we'll talk about, we have an injury question that's coming from our fans as well too. I'm waiting for the pairwise to pop up. Here we are. St. Cloud has dropped 1 spot to 7. So Minnesota's atop everything, which is no surprise. Denver's at 4.
Strange, right?
I think so. Quinnipiac and Merrimack in between. Merrimack obviously rated a little higher than they probably will be at the end of the season. Penn State and 5, BU at 6. I don't know.
And this is where like these holiday interconference sort of matchups, I think, will provide a little bit more clarity on how good these teams are, and that's been one of the drawbacks of the exhibition schedules. If the Minnesota teams, which mind you, I wouldn't change that. But what you miss then, Noah, is you're not getting that sense of, okay, well, how good is the East versus the West? And I think that's why it's been sort of a finicky polls. You know what I mean? So,
it's interesting. I've got a question here for you. Of course, Michigan State at 8, UConn at 9, Ohio State 10, Michigan, Massachusetts, Harvard, UMass, Providence, Notre Dame round out your top 16 right now. Michigan Tech dropped at 19, by the way.
Yes, they did.
Here's what I'm wondering, Nick. If you're scheduling a holiday tournament and you kind of have a gauge on maybe where teams might be at, although this year has been kind of difficult.
Sure.
And you're a good team. Let's say you're St. Cloud. Do you take on a team like RPI, knowing that it might be an easy couple of victories, but the danger is if you drop one?
Right.
Or do you take on a similar opponent that's going to be a tougher matchup, but at the same time, it's not going to hurt you if you split?
I don't know you have that choice, though. That's the thing, is you're getting these holiday invites well in advance, probably in the summertime, right? So I think, just like Brett Larson said before, right? They do have the control over their exhibition schedule / their non-conference schedule. Yeah. And for Brett Larson, his mantra has been, I want a tougher schedule. I want to put our team to be in overdrive and have tough competition off the gate, because it's going to keep us sharp. It's going to keep us in the game, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know if you look at it that way. You know what I mean? I understand your position. I don't know if, say, just based on how teams are this year, right? So Minnesota being a top tier team, I'm not sure if you're necessarily worried about that, but let's look at the parallels, right? Let's maybe look at a team, let's say Boston College, or let's maybe look at Minnesota State. Let's look at Omaha, teams that, if you ask them honestly, right, they know they're not a top tier team, but they want to be competitive, right? Maybe you're looking at it through that lens, right? Which is, do I want to, put myself into a non-conference situation where it'll be good coming out of the break? It might be a good prep to get back into conference play. But I think there is that scare, right, too, which is if you end up having an opponent that's not so great and you don't perform very well, just as much as it could be a confidence builder, it could go the opposite way, right? So I think it depends on the team you're asking. And at the end of the day, you really don't know until you start playing games, right? It's a coach's decision before the season begins. It's all about how you prep and how you execute when the puck drops, unfortunately.
Yeah, certainly would agree. Obviously, of course, taking a look at other NCHC teams, you drop down to 21. North Dakota and Western Michigan both tied in that spot. Bemidji State right there with them. Omaha at 26. Wisconsin still clinging on at 31, right next to Arizona State. Your favorite.
I don't know how that's possible.
Miami is at 36. Keep an eye on that one, obviously, for Huskies fans. Colorado College is at 40 still, which drives me bonkers. Minnesota Duluth is at 43. And that rounds things out. St. Thomas for the other Minnesota schools is at 49, by the way. Mankato was at 24, as you had kind of mentioned. So, those are your pairwise standings. Anything interesting? I did pull up the poll. St. Cloud is still at 4. No first place votes for them last week. But this is, of course, as of December 12th. So Denver, Quinnipiac, Minnesota, rounding out your top 3 there. So, in fact, besides Denver and St. Cloud, compared to pairwise and polling, I guess Western Michigan's at 18. That is it for your NCHC teams. So, it's been kind of an interesting ride for these groups, obviously. Moving over to the WCHA women here, they had some games, some conference games going on, as well as some non-conference action. Round up here for the conference game. Bemidji State traveling to St. Thomas, who had only had one shootout victory this season, and the Tommies had a sweep. Yeah, that's a big deal for this program, and that's a big deal for anybody who's trying to make sure that they don't have a monumental collapse in the second half. Both these teams are kind of cellar dwellers this year. St. Thomas 3-1 and 5-2 in both these matchups, so a big loss for the Beavers, who really this was kind of a big chance for them to maybe kind of get some games back and climb back up in the standings. Not to be for them. No. Mankato non-conference against Long Island, outscoring their opponent 13-2 on the weekend. Then Ohio State Saturday, Sunday against Cornell. We just have the Saturday score. It was 4-3. Ohio State narrowly eking out a victory. St. Cloud State, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Duluth were all off. Bemidji State is now in last place in the WCHA, Nick. Minnesota actually is atop the WCHA with a tiebreaker now. They must have just updated that, because they've only lost 1 in regulation compared to 2 for Ohio State. So, and then Wisconsin 4 points back at 37. Duluth is at 21. St. Cloud 2 points back of them at 19. Mankato 3 points back at 16. St. Thomas vaulting themselves from 0 points a week and a half ago to 8 now. And then Bemidji State is still sitting at 3. They are 1-15-0 in the WCHA. So.
Not great.
It's been for both of those programs, St. Thomas and Bemidji.
It's been tough.
They're kind of in their own little class. Unfortunately, it's like we said, it's the top 3, the middle 3, and the bottom 2. Is kind of how this conference has shaken up. But Nick, the nice thing is, St. Cloud is not in the spot they have been historically, which would have been the bottom 2. So
when we talked about some of the numbers from the last time last week, I remember we're already eclipsing their wins and their goals for. Some players already eclipsing their total season projections of last year already. So I still think, and I know that we've set the bar to be like in that 4th or 5th spot, right?
Yeah. They're at 5 right now, in case people forgot. So,
and if they're able to maintain that, great. I know Mankato's just nipping at their heels. Even if they go, I would even say even to 6. I hate to say it, but it's still fine. I still think there's some success in that. Now, if you can get to 4 or 5 and stay there, to give yourself a better chance would be better. But I still think you can take a lot more positives out of this year already, just based on what they have accomplished. Still some room for improvement, of course. But man, they've had a marquee win against Minnesota. They've Could have had a couple against the Gophers in the last series.
Yeah.
The Gophers had maybe some vengeance in their mind, but this women's hockey team, man, already making significant strides forward, and it's great to see.
Yeah, this Duluth team is kind of a scary matchup, obviously, but here's the difference is, if you're in 4 or 5, you're probably going to get Duluth unless Mankato has a good run in the second half. Otherwise, if you drop to 6, you're probably getting Wisconsin. Ohio State, Minnesota. You'd like to kind of keep that matchup in check. Obviously, women's hockey is off along with the Gophers, Bemidji, Duluth, Mankato, and St. Thomas. The only 2 teams that are playing, Ohio State travels to Lindenwood, and Wisconsin plays Saturday, Sunday against Quinnipiac when we get back after Christmas break. Of course, for the men's team, they're back in action for their exhibition game on the 30th before seeing Minnesota the following weekend. Women's hockey will be playing the following weekend on the 6th and 7th with them. New Hampshire and Merrimack will be the 2 opponents that they will have. Minnesota Wild-wise here. Wild have 3 games upcoming this week. Ottawa today on Sunday, Anaheim on Wednesday, San Jose on Thursday, the last 2 being on the road before they kind of reset for the following Tuesday against Winnipeg. Past week, 2-1 victory against Edmonton and 4-1 victories against Detroit and Chicago put them at 17, 11, and 2, 36 points. They're currently 3rd in the Central with a +9 goal differential that has really risen in the past week. 8-2 in their last 10, one of the best records in their last 10 in the NHL. A couple of talking points here, Nick. Number 1, I know we've talked about him in various lights. You know who's looked really good as of late, I think, anyway?
You're talking about Gustafsson?
Gustafsson's looked good, too. Defenseman.
Talking about Dumba?
Matt Dumba.
Yeah.
He's looked really good. Had that goal disallowed the one night, scored the next night. Had a really good look in the last game against Chicago that he probably could have put one away, too. He's kind of opened up a little bit offensively in the past week and a half. It's been kind of impressive to see. This is, of course, this is around the time back in 2019 when he had that injury against Calgary that kind of derailed everything. But if you start to get some offensive punch from Matt Dumba like we saw in years past, like I said, it's only been a week, so nothing to take a huge thing out of. But I was thinking about that where I was like, people talk about his defensive liability where he's actually not as porous as people want to make him out to be, but he does make some, errors at times that are noticeable.
Decision making more than anything.
Yeah, but if you end up getting a little bit of offensive punch like we've seen in the past week and a half, that was kind of the catch with Matt Dumba is if you got that, it kind of offset everything. I think he's been impressive in the past week. I don't know what you've seen, but
so here's what I've seen from Matt Dumba. He's activating from the point. It's been, and I don't know, because that was part of his game before, again, the big fight, is he would pinch down. He would essentially be a part of that, that high cycle in the zone. And mind you, a lot of it has been, the winger on that, strong side, and he's bolting down that weak side for that seam pass. Again, had that couple of good chances. One that was, like I said, taken back. So, and again, it's sometimes, Noah, you can be effective, not that you convert, but because you're doing it, right? Because you're giving the team something to think about. Where beforehand, maybe as a winger on the defensive side, you didn't have to worry about Matt Dumba coming down, but now it's like, oh crap, like he's, there's a big interchange happening at the top of the zone now. So it's something you have to always account for.
Right.
And we know that he's got the talent to put the puck in the net. Again, he had one, technically it was called back. So if he can at least be that person that you have to account for, that can step up, that can activate, that can be a fifth forward option, and can be a passing option and a shooting option, that alone is a big step for his game. Huge.
Yeah. That goal that he scored that it did count, I believe, against Detroit was a really nice shot posting in on the blocker side too. So the other player that I think actually has really impressed me as of late, it's a forward now. Would you like to take a guess since we're doing the guessing game here? Pretty Gaudreau's been really good too. Newest addition to the Minnesota Wild.
Sammy Walker.
Well, Sammy Walker. Newest trade addition to the Minnesota Wild.
Newest trade addition. Oh, you mean Ryan Reeves?
Ryan Reeves.
Yeah.
He's looked really good, I thought. Yeah. He's generated offense. He's been down low on the forecheck, making plays. Probably should have scored the other night. Had a good one-time opportunity in the slot. Is he the most fleet of foot?
No. That's not why he's out there, though.
But he's been really serviceable in the role that he's been in, tallied a couple of points, probably could have had a couple more. I think it's been an all right fit in Minnesota. Is a fifth rounder a tad high? Sure, but I mean, they're kind of getting what was advertised,
Yeah.
and he's having a bit of a little resurgence.
And it's going to be interesting how they use it, right? Say when guys like Duhaime and when guys like Hartman comes back. I know that's rumored that Hartman may come back tonight against Ottawa, right? It's going to be strange because there is a role that Ryan Reeves plays that makes him incredibly effective, right? And it's with this last week. I think he's actually been playing very, very good in that role that he's been assigned to. It'll be interesting to see what happens. I think Sammy Walker for sure goes back to Iowa, which is unfortunate because I think he's impressed enough, with his call up. But what do you do with Connor Dewar? What do you do with Mason Shaw? There's some big decisions coming for GM Bill Guerin with some of these young players that, especially with Shaw and Dewar, they've been the most potent penalty killing forwards for that's been a big reason why that PK has sort of rebounded. So when you take that into account, there's going to be some really tough decisions coming for them as far as lineup is concerned. And whoever gets sent back down, I mean, you're going to have to make room. Unfortunately, neither player deserves that. It's just a matter of they just don't have the room. That's going to be unfortunate.
Now, obviously, they're not going to send Ryan Reeves down. He'll be a press box guy, if anything.
Yeah.
When guys come back, like you said, Sammy Walker might get the short end of the stick. You look at guys like Brendan Duhaime, that maybe we'll have to see how they return. When we get to the point where everybody is healthy, is Ryan Reeves still in the lineup?
I think he is I think it depends on the situation. I don't know if he's an everyday lineup choice. I think it depends on the opponent, but there is a place for Ryan Reeves in this lineup. I'll say
I agree.
Much. And I think that's, as a coaching staff, right? I mean, Noah, that's the one thing with casual hockey fans, right? Is they look at a player like Ryan Reeves, who he has shall we say he's a niche role, essentially. Yeah. And it's the casual fan says, well, no, they don't look at it that way. They say, okay, well, if he's not going to be let, then why have him anyway? Or it's like, well, no. In today's game, you have different opponents that have different strengths. And there are certain lineup combinations you can throw out there that give you a best chance to win, right? So, for example, would you put Ryan Reeves in the lineup if you're facing the 2007-2008 Calgary Flames? Absolutely, you would, right? Yeah. Are you going to put Ryan Reeves in the lineup if you're facing today's Edmonton Oilers group? Maybe, maybe not, right? It depends on how you play him, but there is a role for him. And I think, again, his fit into the scheme and what Dean Evason wants has been good. It took a little bit to figure it out, but there is a role for him. I think he will be with the squad in some shape or form. And more so, Ryan Reeves is brought in. This team wants him for the playoffs. Let's be honest. I mean, he's a guy that even all he does is park his gigantic frame in front of the net. There's a lot that comes with that come playoff time. Huge.
That's not what I thought you were going to say, but anyway, that's the thing is.
I want to know what you thought I was going to say.
Yeah, we already know, but that's the thing is, you look at him and there's no secret that this team has played taller with him in the lineup. I mean, they've been much more aggressive on the forecheck. He's really brought, I think, if anything, locker room cohesion and chemistry, and really kind of alleviated pressure from a guy like Marcus Foligno, for example, to feel like that he has the pressure to do sorts of, these sorts of things and maybe focus a little bit more on his offensive game and his actual play on the ice. So it's been good. Like we talked about, Ottawa today on Sunday, Anaheim Wednesday, San Jose Thursday, and then the following Tuesday, they're in Winnipeg, at home that Thursday against Dallas, and then on the road that Saturday against St. Louis. So before we come back for our next show. So just to kind of give people essentially an overview of that. My final Minnesota Wild question for you here, in the Christmas color spirit, so to speak, which goaltender for the Minnesota Wild has the better reverse retro setup? Is it Philip Gustafson's retro style pads and helmet, or is it Marc-Andre Fleury's new retro helmet and the all yellow pads?
Oh, that's tough.
The Wild have the best reverse retro setup for goaltenders in the league. They do.
I don't know if I can pick, honestly.
Well, you have to, because this is our show.
This is our show. I'm gonna go with Gustafson. I just like the old school look because that's essentially what the whole idea is behind it, right?
Yeah.
So if you're making me pick one, I got to go with Gustafson. Even though they both look straight awesome.
I think, yeah, exactly. I think when you look at an isolated capacity, Gustafson's looks better. Like if you're just looking at him only, I think during the play on the TV broadcast, I think Fleury's really pops more. It gives that real old school, vibe of the just one straight color pad sort of thing. So like you said, I love them both. I think Marc-Andre Fleury gets the cake for me. Plus, anytime you see Fleury in the old retro yellow style, did you know, I was actually talking with my broadcast partner when we went down to Bismarck yesterday. Do you know the reason why Marc-Andre Fleury actually stopped wearing his yellow pads?
Was he getting lit up on him?
So what happened was there was actually a fan of the Pittsburgh Penguins back in the day that was an optometrist that sent a letter to the Penguins talking about how these bright colors make it easier for shooters to be able to see where where they're shooting. How much of that you take into stock, I don't know, because the goaltending save percentage hasn't changed wildly. But with that being said, Fleury changed to white pads because white is supposed to blend into the ice and be able to, not be able to be seen as effectively. And he was interviewed about it. And that's why we've seen this big switch to these goalies who wore all white pads for a long while before he kind of realized, well, I'm either stopping the puck or I'm not. I'm going to wear what I want to wear. But that is actually the reason why those bright yellow pads actually disappeared from Marc-Andre Fleury for a while, is because an optometrist fan wrote into the Pittsburgh Penguins and told him this. And they ended up interviewing this optometrist and things like that. Like, what a crazy concept.
It's really not if you think about it, though. There's a lot of, shall we say, science behind colors, right?
Yeah.
We know that blue is more of a relaxing color, red more of like, holy crap, a danger color kind of thing. So it's out there. Yeah. And I think just sometimes, when you're looking at it from one lens, right, which is a aesthetic lens, you forget that, wait, my job is still to stop the puck. And you forget that sometimes those colors in contrast make it easier to find where those pads are not.
Yeah, I guess so.
Right. So
yeah, kind of a wild thing that, a fan would write in and be able to have that sort of influence on the NHL. So what a crazy trend.
And kudos, right?
Well, let's talk about crazy trends here. Fan questions here. We're going to get to them. We only have a couple here, but we appreciate those who did reach out. Of course, Derek and Caleb in here as always, and then more clappers. Weldy throwing in here. First, the St. Cloud State question. Spencer Meyer comes back. Who sits?
This is not the answer that is as simple as it seems, right? Because if you look at the lineups Friday, Saturday, Brett Larson has been rotating defensemen in and out. So, but if I had to guess, if there was a defenseman that sort of gets pushed to the side, it's Brady Zimmer. I only say that not because I don't like Brady Zimmer. I think his game is getting better. I think his game certainly has more of a physical side. But when you've looked at the lineups, he's been throwing in Cooper Wiley, Mason Reiners. So there's, shall we say, Brady Zimmer hasn't always been in that rotation, and it's tough, right? Because we don't, just like Ryan Reeves, Brady Zimmer also has a role that he can play, especially against teams that are more physical, right? So it's not you pick one person and that's it, right? We haven't seen a static lineup yet from the blue end, and even that was with Meyer inside in the lineup. So I don't know if it's as simple as that, but I think here's what we can say, right, Noah, is that is when you get to after the holiday break, I know Brett Larson and most coaches, they want to stabilize the lineup, right? They want to get something that's more consistent. Now, with the plethora of depth that they have, and knowing, shall I say, maybe an exposed shortfall from last playoff time, I wonder if Brett Larson will keep that rotation in, right? So it's hard to pick up one guy, but if I had to guess, it's Brady Zimmer. I don't know if you have a different take.
Yeah, Brady Zimmer, maybe Cooper Wiley a little bit. They've kind of rotated back and forth. Maybe Mason Reiners if you throw him in there. Let's not forget, by the way, we did not mention Brendan Bushy will be missing the exhibition game. He did get a 1-game suspension for his hit in Miami, so it does count towards that exhibition game. So we will be missing him for obviously that matchup before we get the Gophers in that one. But yeah, I thought it was kind of a curious question. It's a good little question there. Caleb wants to know, are you going to buy him dinner if the Huskies win the Natty?
Well, let me ask you this. Why does it have to be like that? He keeps whining about it. So, I mean, you could just text, hey, do you want to go out for beers? And I mean, you send in the picture when I was in Minot.
I say, yeah, Nick will buy you dinner. It's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
if it can be, the chicken, whatever it wants to be there at Raising Cane's, well, it doesn't matter. If he wants the chicken and the sauce, I can.
I think it's funny because we enlightened him on the fact that the chicken, when you actually were part of that gift, was actually cold by the time that you got it.
Ice cold.
Yeah.
We've talked about this before, but I mean that was 2 hours old. I mean, it was freaking gross. And so the head nod, for those I know, I got a lot of flack for the head nod. I had to sell it, because I knew that. When you, especially with food, I think, Noah.
I think it would have been way better if you would have just taken a bite and just thrown up all over the
right.
the
And that
table.
was kind of my fear is it's hard to sometimes you just have those unnatural emotions that sometimes you just can't control.
Yeah.
And so my thing was, okay, I kind of have to go into Leonardo DiCaprio mode and actually feel like I'm enjoying it. If I nod my head to do something small like that, it'll come off as this is a hot, right out of the fryer chicken and fries. And the drink, that was empty. There was nothing in there. So I had dried, cold chicken tender in my mouth with nothing to wash it down. It was god awful. But for those who watched it, I think I sold the bit pretty well.
Why did you just describe our podcast? I feel like that was a good description of how palatable we are. Although when you go into Leonardo DiCaprio mode, he's getting older, and if you know what that means, it's maybe not the best thing. With that being said,
with Leonardo DiCaprio though, his significant others have been staying the same age.
Yeah. Yikes. Well, let's talk about age-related hockey questions here.
I didn't go over as well as I wanted to.
Yeah. I'm scared. Derek asked,
you're above the cutoff line.
Derek asked, I just turned 26. Oh my God, you're right. Derek asked, he says, which is worse, the cost of youth sports or the parents that drive players and coaches and officials out of the game because they can't control themselves? I like how this is the best part of the question. After that, he says, pick one or the other. Thanks, Derek.
So you set up. Can I rephrase it? So you set up the trap question, knowing both suck, but yet one is to pick one.
I also enjoy.
Is that what this is?
I also enjoy pick one or the other. This is our show, Derek. We're going to do what we want.
So let's do it this way, because he mentioned that, and because I'm the person that I am, I'm going to blow that question out of the water. Because this is what I do. Derek, let's be honest, man. Both suck. And because I'm older, right? I remember going to Westwood Sports in Bloomington when it was still there, and grabbing a $25 Sherwood wood stick. It was a Paul Coffey curve, for those who are curious.
Scored better with it than he does now, but
yeah, right, exactly. And it was $25, and then a pair of skates was $100. Now, back then, mind you, my family, I was one of 4 kids, and my grandma paid for that. And it's funny when you get older and you realize when you get older, especially when you get into college, right, when every penny counts, and you just, geez, I'm getting a little bit sentimental here, but I'm setting up the bit here a little bit. And you don't really appreciate that till you get in this position, right? Which is, geez, but it's even more magnified now, to Derek's point, which is a stick now is $300.
Yeah.
And in terms of skill development, if you're a family that has either a lower budget, or shall we say has lots of kids, they're doing, like my sister was in gymnastics, they were in figure skating. My other sister did floor hockey and a whole bunch of stuff. That adds up.
Yeah.
And sure, you can go to Dick's and buy the 25 to, I think the wood sticks now close to $50 now.
They do have some programs that allow for used gear or that sort of thing too, which is good.
But at the end of the day, if I'm picking up a wood stick compared to, just the feel and the skill development, that is just completely different, right? So you're falling behind. Yeah. And so that sucks because there is a gap there, right? There is a huge financial burden, especially in the game of hockey. We've talked about that before. Yes, the equipment drives. Played Against Sports, I know, was a good spot to find some slightly used gear.
Still is, and you can find some really good. The one thing that's nice about Played Against Sports is they have a lot of times some older gear from actual college or NHL teams, and you can find pro stock stuff. I'm telling you, if you were like me, where you were a skinny kid, where you always hit your hips against the boards with the regular pants or breezers that you wore, if you get a set of pro stock, like I have some old Easton St. Cloud State ones, my hips have never been hurt since because they have that double padding.
Yep.
That's so nice to have. They're a little bit heavier, but I'll take that with not bruising my hips time and time
Right.
again. But
So aside all that, say kids on the ice and they're having fun, right? Now the parents and K-Fan had a bit on this with a basketball refs and those kind of things. And to be honest with you, both contribute to a negative experience for the kid and the player, right? Let's be honest. It sucks when, especially let's go back like 7-8 years, right? When the pricing and the big equipment revolution kind of came about, right? I think that's a proper way to phrase it.
Yeah.
And, your friends have got the Easton S7s or the S19, or, they kept going with that S line for a while, the Stealth line, the new Bauer Nexus and whatnot. And you're sitting there with the CCM wind stick, right? That's one part. And then you go out there and then you're hearing, let's go with my mom. My mom is 5'4", and you would think that the way she screamed it, she was 6'10".
Yeah.
Her voice, and maybe just because it's the pitch, and maybe Marissa Voss could attest to this because she's probably that same size. The voice hurts, just cut through everything. So despite me being, for a lot of my growing up, the smallest player on the ice, every time that I went to hit somebody, I could pick out the one voice in the crowd that was exclamated about everything. Now, my mom wasn't to the point that Derek's getting at. My mom was never like the blowing up the refs or fighting other parents. She wasn't like that. She was like, no, let's come on. I need a beer. Let's go. Let's go to the bar. Right. But the parents nowadays, because it's just, again, you're spending that money. I think that's part of it. So you want some return on investment, right? So if your kid doesn't get the goal, it's called back. It's the ref's fault, and it's getting way out of hand.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, if you're a player on the ice, and I'm sure Noah, you could attest, not by personal experience, but maybe by being in a situation or hearing it from somebody else.
Yeah, or officiating.
Right. It's embarrassing, right? Where it's, it's like, dude, it's just a game. Or, on the bench, it's like, is that your mom in the stands? Yeah. Yeah. It's my mom. Okay. I'll be it's in a corner.
And it's interesting too, because it's one thing where it's like, and I talk about like officiating too, when I do officiating, it's one thing if it's 5-5 with a minute left and you're playing in the playoffs. I get the frustration. I get the animosity. But yeah, like you mentioned, at a youth game, it's usually not that serious most of the time. And you talk about this question, Nick, and he asks, which is worse? I'll put it this way. There is one in my mind. I don't think they're close. I think there's one that's definitively way worse right now. And I think there's one that has gotten way worse. Yeah. If that makes sense. So the one that has gotten way worse is the cost of equipment. It's been absurd, like you mentioned. If you want a tip, by the way, if you're buying gear, especially as your kids get older, skates, the top of the line skates are $1,100, $1,000, $1,100. Next line down is usually about $600. Yeah. And then you have the ones that are like $400, then ones that are like $200, and then you have maybe one more that's just like a basic skate. Yeah. I wear the $400 skates because they're good enough for men's league where I don't need them to survive that wear and tear. And that was the only reason for buying the most expensive skate. But I only got to that point when I was in high school and college. Like at that point, it made sense to buy a skate that was going to handle the wear and tear. If you're anywhere below that, or even like a freshman in high school or below, buy the next model down from the most expensive one, because all that model is last year's model revamped. And that was the brand new skate a year ago.
Yep.
And it's now the second skate, but it's still a fantastic skate that you can take for half the price. Yep. And that's what you have to buy. So that has gotten way worse. The cost of sticks is absolutely absurd, like you mentioned. I miss the feel of a wood blade because you can feel the puck so much better. They just disintegrate so quickly compared to composite shafts and blades. But as far as what is worse fundamentally, and it hasn't changed, and in fact, maybe has gotten a little bit worse, parents who are irrational or irresponsible at a hockey rink just ruin the entire experience, Correct. And it's one thing to, my dad obviously, was a hockey guy through and through and was pretty quiet and didn't, chime in very much. He would have the very occasional one where he'd be like, like if it was a hit from behind, he's like, you got to call that, like things that are dangerous and well warranted. Yeah, exactly. But beyond that, he wasn't on the refs. He was sitting, he was watching the hockey game. To me, when you have a parent, especially as an official, or even players who are kind of that way towards officials, when you have teams that bring whatever capacity of parent, fan, coach, mix, whatever, and they're disruptive to the way that you're trying to officiate the game, even if you call a poor game, you have no time for them. You don't want to listen to them. You don't want to deal with it. You don't respect what they say because they're feeding you line after line after line. And the problem with that is even if you have players on that team who, one or two that is a chatterbox who just likes to chirp and chirp and chirp. Well, then if you're a player who has a legitimate complaint or a legitimate gripe and you're not wearing a letter, the official's not going to listen to you because how do they pick out what's serious and what's not, or what matters and what doesn't? I think having parents who are extremely disruptive is awful.
And this is true across all youth sports, by the way. It's not just hockey.
Yeah.
We see and we hear about it in hockey just because it seems to be quite egregious when it's there.
Yeah.
But baseball refs, baseball, softball, umpires.
I think it's worse at the parent level in hockey. I think professional sports, it's worse at a fan level for other sports.
Yeah.
Like football games, you can get some pretty crazy stuff happening at a football game, for example. Baseball games are usually pretty chill, unless you're Steve Bartman. So the other question he asks is, what would be the hockey penalty for biting someone's finger off during a fight? And have either of you gotten into a fight in the stands before?
My God,
definitely not gotten into a fight in the stands.
No.
I guess I should say I've stepped in front of people who have gotten aggressive towards other people, but I've never swung at somebody and never had the intention of like starting a fight. Definitely just more like crowd control kind of thing.
I'm trying to be the voice of reason.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Which my voice doesn't carry very well to begin with, but
depends on which fan base you're talking to too.
Yeah. It's actually kind of a bad fan base for some craziness like this that has kind of emerged recently. The Avs.
Yeah.
Some of the Colorado fans get kind of crazy. Yeah, that's the thing. It's like, it's one thing to be aggressive and be into your team, but you got to just chillax. It's okay. And stop having so many beers. But the
breweries would attach to the frickin' arena.
Yeah, true. But nice going, Summit.
I know,
right? But anyway, the hockey penalty for biting someone's finger off, I believe it's intent to injure.
It would be, yeah. I think intent to injure.
It'd be a match penalty and a game ejection.
Should be a match penalty with the game misconduct because remember Brady Tkachuk, right?
Brady Tkachuk, Brendan Lemieux, yeah.
Because was it biting or was it eating? As according to Steve Nickel, bit him twice. It's eating. Yeah. It's bad too because it's like, why? Like even just it's the why. It's
Alex Burrows did that a couple years ago. Mike Tyson,
right?
Was
it Max LaPierre part of that too, or am I making that up?
Well, that's the thing. It's like we talked about the kicking video last week too. There's never been a real reason to like that I've thought where I've like, you know what, this is a good idea. Now, if someone was like, if they had their glove over my face and they had their like fingers literally in my mouth and I couldn't breathe and I couldn't get away, then I'm probably going for it. But it's like other than that's like self-defense almost.
Yeah, that's not like you're doing it because you want to do it. You're doing it because you have to do it.
Yeah, like I eat a balanced breakfast. I don't need any more than
a balanced breakfast. For those playing the home game, a balanced breakfast to Noah is eating half of what's on the farm field. So
you know what? Have you ever had farm fresh eggs? You haven't lived until you've had farm fresh eggs. I'm just throwing that out there.
I've actually had it a couple of times, and yes, they're damn good.
Yeah, they're unreal.
I know. It's amazing when you have the what do you want to call it, farm to table, essentially, like that
farm
kind
fresh,
of farm
whatever.
Fresh, the differences in it. I get the whole like organics thing, even though I think nowadays the organic thing is more of a marketing tool than it actually is promising.
Yeah.
But that farm fresh stuff, I know that there are even, shall we say, like meat producers in Iowa and other parts of the globe or I shouldn't say the globe, but the US, where it's like you have to sign up and you get their meat stock at fall and that's it. And you prepay in advance. And then like, it's like a meat raffle in a sense where half of it, well, more than half, it's going to go in your freezer, but it's fresh stuff, and it's the taste differences.
Yeah. Farm fresh stuff. Food, deer sausage. Obviously we used to have that all the time. We'd have what was called Breakfast Club. I think they still do it, where you would skate every Wednesday and then there would be a parent group that would come in and make you food after you skated before you went to school in the morning. That was awesome. Farm fresh eggs, they're excellent, obviously. But You didn't like that one? So that's
Just not new.
that's the end of the main portion of the show. Before we get to the World Junior preview, I mean, do you have any?
Yeah, that one didn't make me cluckle. So
I'm scared. Do you have any other like Christmas traditions? Are there like certain movies that you watch during Christmas? I mean, Home Alone. I think a lot of people watch that. A Christmas Story. It's a Wonderful Life.
Christmas Vacation is what our family will put on just because we like to laugh. And I think again, you can watch a movie like that and you can pick out a character and say, "Yep, that's this person in your own family," right?
Yeah.
The shitter was full. So
I watched, we always have a marathon. We always have the Harry Potter marathon. I don't know why we do it over Christmas, but we watch all the movies.
It's a long movie watching.
I don't know why that ever came about. I think I came home one Christmas in college, like my freshman year, and we ended up watching through them all. And now we do it every year for whatever reason. Couple of others like feel good movies or like movies that always make me happy. I watched, it's interesting. Speaking of hockey and quirks and things that you notice about movies, I was watching Goon, the original, movie, because of course I watched Slapshot the other night too. So I was kind of going on a hockey movie craze. But it's interesting.
Was Miracle next?
No, I actually haven't watched Miracle in a long time, but I could probably quote that movie from tip to tail.
Probably.
And what's interesting about Goon is I love picking out the little like breaks in continuity, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And when they end up going and playing in Quebec, which is actually the MTS Center in Winnipeg, is where they where they filmed it. Most of the film was filmed in Portage la Prairie, even though it's said that it's in Halifax, but most of it's in Portage. And so when they go to the MTS Center and they're playing and the fans are packed, there's two things that are absolutely hilarious that I love about this movie. Is one, you look at the game that's on the ice compared to the players, the jerseys aren't even the same because it's an exhibition game in 2010 between the Chicago Blackhawks and Tampa Bay Lightning in Winnipeg. And they've taken Chicago's red jerseys and color chromed them to blue, which is hilarious because you look in the stands and you look at the jerseys. So the overarching shots of the building are actually from that exhibition game. And then they've whited out like the power bands and stuff to make it look like it's part of the, and they overlaid the graphics on the Jumbotron. So there's part one. And then part two, for those who don't know, when they do a lot of fan scenes in movies, they only have maybe 200 or 300 fans, and they have them sit at various spots in the arena so that they can catch the shot that they're looking for. And then they have them move around, to make sure that they, get the shot. It's funny. They have a couple of scenes where they're right near the benches and getting ready to play the game. And there's fans right behind the benches. And if you look on either side of the two shots that they have, it's cardboard cutouts of people that you can see in the background. So I love quirks like that. That's one of my favorite things about watching movies is I like picking out, because of course, Nick, as you and I know, we both, have a little bit of broadcasting camera experience too, as well too. And like to kind of
yeah, quite a few. Anyway.
Yeah. Like to kind of pick through those things and think about how did they do this shot? How did they, make this happen? How did they edit this in post or that sort of thing? So I love picking out quirks like that. That's one of my favorite parts about watching movies. But do you have any other go-to movies, Christmas traditions, like Christmas meal type things?
Yeah, it hasn't been as much recently just because the weather has been, actually the last few years has been warm. Yeah. Usually we would go, we would skate. We would go to a local rink and skate. This year, actually, if the rinks are ready, it actually might actually be possible, depending if the weather stays like this. Because we used to go to my grandfather's in Bloomington, and he literally borders a city park, so we had a rink, so we would bring our skits and our skates. Sticks and skates for those who can enunciate.
I have cousins in Farmington, Lakeville area, and they're right next to a park, so we used to do that too. We'd go and skate on that outdoor rink during Christmas time. So,
so that would be another one that has been not as prominent as of recent, just because of weather. Last couple, I mean, it's been warm, but I think we're going to get lucky this year. Beyond that, not. So I guess the big thing is, so with my immediate family, what we would do is we'd stay up till midnight. And then we would,
depending on how many schnapps you have.
Right. It depends on what the flavor too. But we would actually open gifts that night. And then we would go to bed, and then Christmas Day is more of a chill day. So what we used to do though as a kid is, when I used to live in Bloomington, is I had cousins in Apple Valley. Would go to my mom's side on Christmas Eve, then my dad's side Christmas Day. Both not very long drives, but that's kind of how we'd split it.
Yeah.
So that was nuts.
I do remember. It's kind of funny, like you think back to your childhood too. The one of the best Christmas memories I've ever had. Most of them we spent at home, but we went and visited my grandparents in Alexandria when I was a kid, and I was like 6 or 7, and my dad that year got me a PlayStation 2.
Oh boy,
with NHL 06, and that was the first game that we played, and that was
nice.
That was Christmas and a half, for a hockey kid, right? I mean, that was unreal. So, and that was kind of the start of the video game craze. So, I mean, it was a lot of fun. It's just fun to look back and kind of think about, Christmas traditions. And it's such a wonderful time of year. It's a great year for giving. Like the Minotauros, they do a teddy bear toss night and give, donations to local charities, and the teddy bears go to kids in need. And that's awesome. They get 1,000 teddy bears every time, So there's some of these games in the EC or the AHL that are pulling, 9,000, 10,000 teddy bears during some of these games. It's just fantastic. Heck of a cleanup, but
yeah.
Fantastic as always. Well, let's talk about what should hopefully be a very well-attended event. Hopefully this upcoming couple of weeks here, the World Juniors, as we head on to our extra ice session. And welcome into the Extra Ice Session, Huskies Warming House podcast. Last little bit here of 2022 before we flip over to the calendar year. And we're going to talk USA, Canada, and the like World Junior Championship. Rosters have been out for both teams. So, of course, we have both teams, meaning the US and Canada, because I'm assuming we're interested in both of them.
Usually.
Which one do you want to start with for rosters? I should,
US.
Yeah. I should also see. I should see if the schedule is up. By the way, I'm assuming it is.
Should be.
Let's take a look here. I always forget it's the 2023. Of course, games start on Monday, December 26th. It will end on January 5th, that Thursday. It is when things will kind of be ramping down. So one of our shows will be right in the middle of the medal round, actually. So looking at the schedule here, let's start here. The U.S. will start on the 26th. They'll have Latvia. Canada will start with the Czechs for their first matchup, moving through there. Then after that, 27th, both teams are off. The 28th, the U.S. has Slovakia. Canada has Germany. U.S. plays again on the 29th against Switzerland, and Canada has Austria the same day. And then U.S. doesn't play till the 31st. They've got Finland, and Canada and Sweden have each other. So these two teams will actually, I believe, not match up during the prelims, which is something that is fairly common usually. I do not see the matchup for that as well, too. In fact, let's look at the pools here. I'm assuming that so Group A is Canada, Sweden, the Czechs, Germans, and the Austrians. And then Group B is headlined by the U.S., the Finns, the Swiss, the Slovaks, and the Latvians. So, so that's kind of your breakdown for what's going on. As you mentioned, let's start with the U.S. Why don't we? On the forward side of things, Jackson Blake from the University of North Dakota. Good to see him kind of get that jump, obviously, too. Obviously, looking for a little bit more, I think, in conference play. Of course, the Carolina Hurricanes draft pick for him. Gavin Brindley coming from Michigan. He is draft eligible this year. Tyler Boucher in the OHL for Ottawa. He's a Sens draft pick. Kenny Connors from UMass in the NCAA. LA Kings pick. Logan Cooley, no surprise here, from Minnesota. Third overall pick of Arizona last year in the draft. Logan Cooley, heard a lot of really great things about him, by the way, about his character and who he is off the ice, and just a really nice dude. Do you feel like Logan Cooley, hopefully is going to have a good showing at the World Juniors, but do you feel like he's a player that is going to be a consistent NHL player, like a top 6 guy?
I do.
In Arizona, probably, but do you feel like on any team he would crack a lineup?
I do. Yeah, just his skill set, his maturity, I think, is what's setting him apart at his age right now. I think, when you look at young players, and we talked about this with, at least initially with Bedard, not with Bedard, but with Shane Wright, which was, there were questions about his maturity, even though that seems to be less of a storyline now with him, which is good. But it's always nice when you, as NHL teams, right, you go and you interview these draft picks, right? And yes, you know the hockey, right? At this point, when you're a top 5 potential draft pick, you know what they are as players, right? But the other side of it is who they are as people, right? Let's go back to the Minnesota Wild, Zach Parise, Ryan Suter, right? they're decent hockey players. Yeah, they have regressed a little bit, but part of the reason why they were able, they slashed him with the huge cap implications is supposedly they were not the best fits in the locker room, right?
Yeah.
Logan Cooley is not that kind of person. It seems like the maturity is there. He's got leadership qualities. And so when you have the skill set on the ice with the ability to be a locker room presence and a leader off the ice, what more can you ask, right? And so with those attributes, you can go into any NHL organization, any locker room, and be a contributor both on and off the ice. So that's
certainly fifth in NCAA point production, 25 points in 19 games. Of course, decent. Has 10 goals on the season, as does Cutter Gauthier for Boston College. He's a Philadelphia Flyers draft pick. So 6 assists for him across 13 contests for Boston College. Of course, Logan Cooley, Red Savage from Miami of Ohio, a Red Wings pick. And then Charlie Stramel from Wisconsin, who's draft eligible, all played in the rescheduled World Juniors back in August. Other Golden Gophers, Jimmy Snuggerud, St. Louis Blues draft pick, and then former Gopher Chaz Lucius in the AHL with Winnipeg, Manitoba organization. Noah Laba from Colorado College. Good to see a CC Tiger on here, a New York Rangers draft pick. So the Tigers, I think, hopefully are going to add more to this list as we go. Dylan Duke from Michigan, Sam Lipkin from Quinnipiac, Rutger McGroarty, that's a handful of a name, from Michigan as well. And that rounds out our forward group. On the defensive side, we do have some hometown love here for St. Cloud State. We'll get to that at the end here. Sean Behrens from Denver. You mentioned him and his ability, how he kind of turned heads at the Colorado Avalanche prospect showcase. He's a guy that you kind of feel maybe might make the jump to the next level.
Most likely.
Yeah. Seamus Casey from Michigan, a lot of Michigan Wolverines still. New Jersey Devil pick, Ryan Chesley from Minnesota, a lot of Gophers, but no surprise there, the Gophers are good this year. He's a Caps draft pick. Another Michigan Wolverine, Luke Hughes. That one's not surprising.
No,
of course,
not
a Devils
stretch of the imagination.
Devils draft pick. Luke Middlestat from Minnesota, who's draft eligible. Lane Hudson from Boston, and then Ryan Ufko from UMass, who's a Preds draft pick. And then, of course, the last one, Jack Peart, St. Cloud State, Minnesota Wild draft pick. What do you expect from Jack in this tournament? Obviously, had a showing, of course, along with Hughes, Behrens, that are returning to this squad on the backside here. Do you expect Jack Peart to have a little bit better showing than he did in August?
Yeah, it's hard to say. And I know that's weird because they weren't really using him. They were kind of using him as a bottom 3 role on the last time. Now, Jack, the big knock on Jack has been, shall we say, the lack of footwork sometimes, right? Sometimes, like, he's a great passer, but sometimes is a little bit, shall we say, hesitant to use his feet. So if he is going to have a better showing, going to have to be a little bit more, shall we say, movable, especially in his own end. So if he's able to use his feet, which again, he's not the most fleet of foot defenseman, but he's just incredibly good on the IQ side, then he will have a good showing. And that's going to be the key to his success is, can he find that combination of thinking while moving? Because if he does that, I mean, we saw essentially the same growth with Nick Perbix over his career with St. Cloud, which is, we saw that the smarts were there, makes the right reads, but just sometimes did it standing still. And I think if he's able to find that combination, yes. And for him, and I think for his own development, that's the next stage of his game. And if he's able to do it, he'll have a better showing.
Yeah, certainly would agree. I was trying to look at the pronunciation guide for our netminders here because I always struggle. No, Caden Emberko, I know it. I always Andrew. I feel like it's Oki. However you say it. It wasn't.
I think it is Oki.
Yeah.
I think
coming from Saginaw in the OHL. Of course, him and Caden Emberko from CC are back in the nets, and then Trey Augustine from the U.S. National Development Program, future Michigan State Spartan, draft eligible. All 3 of these netminders draft eligible. So goaltending wise, hopefully the U.S. can have a good showing from Emberko, who I thought looked all right for most of the tournament. Obviously let in a goal he probably wanted to have back in one of the pivotal games, of course. But like we said, December 26th, they start in both Halifax and Moncton. The U.S., like we mentioned, Finland, Latvia, Slovakia, Switzerland. Preliminary round play taking place in New Brunswick. They'll have 2 pre-tournament games in Canada against Sweden on Monday, and then Finland on Wednesday. So kind of pay attention to that as we move through. On the other side of things, Canada's roster, highlighted by Caden Bankier, of course, Minnesota Wild draft pick on the forward side. So good to see that. Some Wild draft picks that did make it and some that we thought were going to make it that didn't make it. So kind of a bit of a flip-flop. Of course, the name to watch here, Connor Bedard from Regina in the dub. Probably the consensus number one overall pick coming into this matchup for the Canadians. Of course, like we mentioned, the Canadians have 4 games as well. I don't know who their pre-tournament games are, but
Robin,
Colton Dock from Kelowna, Zach Dean, Adam Fantilli from Michigan.
He's good. Yeah,
Nathan Goucher, Dylan Gunther, who's with Arizona right now playing in the NHL. Zach Ostapchuk for Vancouver in the dub. Brennan Othman for Peterborough. Joshua Roy, Reed Schaefer, Logan Stankoven, and Shane Wright. Of course, Reed Schaefer and Shane Wright both in Seattle, one in the NHL, one in the WHL. So that's your forward group. Defensive side, Nolan Allen in the WHL for Seattle as well. Brant Clark, Ethan Del Maestro, Tyson Hins, Kevin Korchinski in the dub with Seattle as well. A lot of Seattle Thunderbirds. Jack Medier, however you say that, and Olin Zellweger, who of course is a great defenseman, obviously Anaheim Ducks draft pick. So you really only have actually one NCAA player on here, and that's Adam Fantilli from Michigan on the forward side. Then in net, only 2 netminders, Thomas Milik and Benjamin Goudreau from Sarnia in the OHL, San Jose draft pick. So Bedard, Maestro, Gauthier, Ostapchuk, Othman, Roy, Stankoven, and Zellweger return to the squad. The final cuts were Owen Beck, Carson Lambos, of course, Minnesota Wild draft pick, Ryan Green, couple of guys that were maybe surprising cuts for this team here. Which team, the obvious question, which team do you think has the edge right now?
I think Canada does, honestly. Just because I think the top end talent is there. I think it's hard because, and I like their back end too. I like their back end is a little bit more deep than the USA.
But Jack Peart, though, Nick.
I know, right? Now, the big question for Canada has always been goaltending, right?
Yeah, which has still been a question mark entering this tournament.
It has been. So, and that's the thing is when Canada's been successful, it's come down to their goaltending. They've had good goaltending because I think at the end of it, there's been no question about their forward group and the defenseman group. It's been, can they get the right stops? So if there's any Achilles heel, which hard to see with anything with Team Canada, it's going to come down to in between the pipes, where I think that's where, if there's any advantage for the USA over Canada, it's going to be in goaltending. I think Caden Mberico is there. Trey Augustine's been good. So it depends on how those guys perform. But I think if you're going to match up 4 defensemen, Canada's got the edge.
You know, what's interesting is basically a CHL versus NCAA
pretty much
matchup between these 2 squads here. You know, and we talk about the development, obviously, and the path that you take, WHL, OHL, for sure, maybe the Q as well. A little more NHL ready with the physical grit. As far as, you know, youth players that can make that jump. NCAA a little bit more where guys that are a little bit more raw, but they develop into these big, strong players if they ride out, 2, 3, 4 years at the NCAA level. But it's kind of interesting. Canada still was the team to beat for the longest time until maybe the 2010s. John Carlson's overtime winner in that World Junior. What a great year for hockey 2010 was, by the way, both on the Olympic stage and World Junior as well. Of course, the 2010 World Juniors happened in 2009, technically. Like a couple months before. But regardless of that, it's great to see where the U.S. has kind of made their jump compared to years past and become a competitive powerhouse here. Is there any other team you feel like, might have a bit of a look, as far as that's concerned? I also, speaking of the WHL and that sort of thing, we also had another conversation that's maybe World Junior related. The stipend that CHL players get is not large.
No, it's not.
Do you think that there is a case or some way that we should make a stipulation where these players who are technically paid should be waived and they should end up being able to play Division I hockey?
Oof. I don't know. Because I think that comes down to the player, right, Noah? That is, the stipend is one thing, but I think you're more concerned about the level of competition and development, right?
We talked about maybe guys who are not drafted by an NHL team are free to play Division I, but if you're drafted, you make the jump.
It's hard. I don't know, because there's already sort of a weird partnership with the NHL and juniors, right? Because again, if you're a junior tendered player and you are like Shane Wright, for example, we talked about with Shane Wright, if you can't be sent to the AHL because the junior team still owns your rights, which means either you are an NHL player or you're a junior player. There's no in between. I wonder if the next CBA is going to address that. You kind of figure maybe not. And I say that just because I think they like that partnership. They like having, because it's a tendered player, right? You're still kind of their property. But you kind of wonder if you become draft eligible, do you change the rules, which is the team, like shall we say that if you're signed, right? If you become signed, do you finally disrupt that connection where you can be sent to the American Hockey League and not to juniors? I don't know.
Right.
It's been, shall we, I don't know if we want to call it an eyesore, but it's been sort of a not player friendly partnership, especially on the development side. You kind of wonder if that will be addressed. I don't know if that's going to be solved.
Because obviously, for those who don't know, and this doesn't happen often, but it can happen. If you're a true freshman, 18, 19 years old, and you play a year at the Division I level, you could still play in the CHL, but you can't go the other direction.
Correct.
But that's the thing, is you have some of these guys who maybe don't get drafted and they finish their age 20 season, and maybe they are good hockey players, but they really don't. They can play professionally somewhere, I guess, but maybe the best path for them is to play college hockey. Now, the other challenge is some of these guys, you get college support essentially to be able to go to college if you play in the CHL too, which some of these guys obviously take advantage of. But yeah, I kind of wonder if there is something where there's a case where you can have some of these guys that could play Division I hockey. I don't know what that would look like, but like I said, the stipend they get is not. I mean, it's enough to eat food and basic necessities,
basically it.
Type thing. I don't know how you would do it. I don't know if it's like if you played less than 100 games or something like that, or if you.
Yeah, I don't know if that solves it either.
Or do you? I mean, like I said, it's not a bad perspective. I'm just kind of throwing it out there.
Right.
Do you think that we shouldn't, like, it should just stay as it is? Like, it shouldn't, like, if you play in the dub, you play in the O, you understand. Once you go, and that's how it should be.
I think that is what it is. Because it's similar to the NCAA, right? Once you make the jump, eligibility's done. Because I think it has to go with, you have to have a signed contract, right? Because I think right now, going back to the Shane Wright situation, right? Technically, he's a Seattle player, but if he, for whatever reason, because he's still junior eligible because of his age, he can't go to the American Hockey League. I think that's bogus, because you've signed the deal with the parent club, which means you should have the right as the parent club
to move as you see fit
to the AHL, right? So it's weird. It's very weird. Now, this is where, again, if you take that approach, though, which is, okay, you sign a player, but if he's a slide risk candidate, then you can't send him back to juniors then if he doesn't make the cut, kind of thing, right?
Right.
So that's where it's like, what in the absolute blank do you do here? It's not a clear-cut answer.
It's a weird thing, too, and not to say that even if you changed it where guys can play in the A, that you couldn't, I guess, send him down from the A to a junior squad because they're junior eligible, technically.
Right.
But if you think about it, like, let's say that Shane Wright's former team is headed to the playoffs and Shane Wright, is not in the Kraken lineup, you could have Shane Wright in your lineup for the playoffs. Like,
right. But you can make that case to the American Hockey League too. Like, you don't tell me that Coachella Valley wouldn't love to have him as part of their roster too, right? So, but it can't be. I think what has to happen, I think part of the actual conversation has to be, whereas there can't be an exclusive sort of like, you can't go here, you can't go there, right? If you want to maybe fix it, allow every level to be up for discussion, right? So let's say Connor Bedard, we send him to the AHL in a conditioning stint, and he is terrible, right? Let's just say that he really is just not figuring it out. Can you go back to his junior squad if he's eligible? Sure, right? Whereas, say what you were wanting, send him back to junior. Let's say he's just a man amongst boys, right? But in the NHL, he was just, again, not at that level. I think he should have the ability to go to the American Hockey League and play, not just as a conditioning stint, but as part of a level where he can go and fine tune his game, right?
Versus, like, you know, say a guy like Austin Matthews, where you could have sent him down to the A, because that's where he would have ended up, because he played in Europe. But final question here on the World Juniors, real quickly. If either of these teams, Canada or the U.S., wins the World Championship, who will it be and why?
It's going to be Team Canada. And I think just because they are going to, they're going to be tough to catch up as far as offense production goes. I just think there's just so much special talent there up front with Fantilli, Connor Bedard, just to name a couple of players. I do like their back end with Korchinski, Zellweger, just to name a few players. But again, it's going to be, shall we say, an arms race with them. If their goaltending is the suspect character, the U.S. can keep pace with that. The question is going to be, as we saw this with the women's side too, right? Just last year, Canada women's are blowing people out. We said, hang on a second. Like, if there's going to be, or no, it was the U.S. women, sorry, if they get to be a defensive team, they're going to struggle. And Canada was the defensive team, right? So it's going to be interesting, but I still feel like Canada can overcome that. I just feel like they're too deep.
Yeah, well, in typical fashion here, I'm going with the U.S. for two reasons here. Number one, I think their forward group is not as high octane, but I think they're more balanced than Canada, where they're not going to have to rely on one unit or one power play group or that sort of thing. I think they're going to get scoring up and down the lineup. I agree with you. I think the defensive core favors Canada heavily in this one. So this defensive group for the U.S. is going to have to show some mettle here. Although, of course, a couple of these young guys that were not on the team before, you think Ryan Chesley, for example, Minnesota's defensive core might be the deepest D-core that Gophers team has seen in 2 decades. I mean, they look really good. Luke Mittelstadt, obviously, too. Goaltending edge has to go to the U.S. So I think if they get enough good goaltending to keep them in a hockey game, they're going to have enough goal support from the depth that they have as far as the forward side. It's just the defensive core has to play beyond their years a little bit in this tournament to have a chance. But I do think it should be a good matchup. Don't count the Swedes out. Don't count the Finns out.
Watch out for Team Germany.
Yeah, Team Czechia as well, too. You never really know. So it should be interesting. But like we mentioned, a couple of prelim games, one on Monday, one on Wednesday, and then, of course, the 26th, day after Christmas, we get rocking and rolling for some hockey action. Then the 27th, college hockey is back again, and we will be back on January 1st, obviously, to recap it all. Men's hockey playing December 30th, women's hockey waiting till the following weekend where they play the 6th and 7th against New Hampshire and Merrimack. Men's hockey will be playing the Gophers at that time. Wild have 6 games, maybe 7, before the end of the calendar year and before we are back here on the Huskies Warming House podcast. That will do it for episode number 142. That will do it for the Huskies Warming House podcast 2022 coverage. And we'll move on to the next calendar year. And we can't wait to be a part of it. Wishing you a safe and happy holiday here this Christmas season. For Nick Maxon, I'm Noah Grant, and we will see you in a couple weeks in the den.
One-timer coming, they score! Ripped in! A bomb from Pervix!
So Dana Rasmussen fires and she scores! Dana Rasmussen for the Huskies alongside
Dwayne Kaprizov in for a chance to win it! He scores! Kirill the Thrill is for real! Welcome to the NHL!
Cathedral is now 42.6 seconds away from wrapping up the school's first ever title.